Hello, everybody, and welcome to StarNet Link. And today's the topic of discussion. I thought I'll go ahead and do a book review. The book review that I'm going to be doing is called Genome by Max Ridley. He wrote a book about the human genome where he summarized it for a general audience. For people who don't know a whole lot about genetics, there are 23 chromosomes that make up the genetic structure, of the genetic genome of our species or the human race. 23 different chromosomes that make up the human structure, the human genome. I do want to point out something on my personal opinion before I begin this book review. He does talk about the double helix in this book. In my personal opinion, I don't actually believe that we have a double helix. I do believe that we have a triple helix. And I'll explain a little bit more about the triple helix. So I do believe that the double helix is mostly about the physical aspect of the human body, like our history, our makeup, how we evolved, everything like that. But I also do believe that there is a triple helix, which connects to our metaphysical or our spiritual body or our essence of our soul, or the spiritual side of ourselves, which connects with our physical body. I do believe that there are certain spiritual aspects that connect to the physical aspects of our body that can create diseases and stuff. But I also want to let people know that I do also believe that certain people do choose to whether or not they want to live this life or choose the way that they want to experience life. So I do want to point this out. But the reason why I'm doing a book review, because there are certain aspects of this book that might help people or explain a little bit more about my research, but also to help people understand a little bit more about science and a little bit more of my viewpoint and the reason why I sort of like advocate for certain stuff. But I also want to talk about this book as a way to help people understand. And he mostly wrote this book for the general public to order to understand it without being bogged down, or people who don't know or don't have a background in science to generally read this book. This book, there are 22 chapters. This book was published in 1999. And then it was like refurbished or republished in 2006. So during this time, the 23rd chromosome was still being studied. So there's only like 22 chapters in this book that cover only 22 chromosomes. But if you count the introduction chapter of this book, then there's 23 chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and explain or showcase the table of contents to show you or explain how the book works. So this is a table of contents. He gives a preface to help people understand a little bit more about the human structure, the information behind it, and then gives an introduction or like a breakdown how our genetic structure is for people who don't have a background in science. And then he gets into talking about our 23 chromosomes. Each chromosome in the book is connected to a topic that is associated or connected to the information based on the chromosome. So chromosome 1 is based on life. Chromosome 2 is based on species, like our species history, or in chapter 1 is based on our life. And then species is basically how our species came about, how we evolved, and then basically our history, like where we've been and everything. So it basically, this is basically like a backstory between each and every chromosome, how it makes up us, the human race, in a sense. But the thing that I wanted to talk about, and the reason why I'm talking about this book, is because he does talk about eugenics and ethics and about moral code when it comes to science. I do believe that there needs to be more moral or ethical code when it comes to science. And the reason being is because I think for scientists, we go too far. And this was especially seen in World War II, where some of the knowledge that was discovered in World War II cannot be used due to the fact that it was called pseudoscience. Um, I do believe that there is a more better and more conscious way of going about science without, I guess, in a sense, torturing or bribing or basically having or doing pseudoscience in a sense that's similar to World War II. I do believe that we need to have a moral code so we don't take things too far and end up destroying ourselves when it comes to science. And that's what he mostly discusses in this book. He also talks about different genetic diseases that are connected to our genetics. He does say that there isn't a flaw, or if you think of it at our genetic structure as a programming device, he says that our genetics don't have a deficiency or doesn't there's not an error in our genetic code. There's just a mutation or a new code that's added into our genetics that create a genetic code. But there is some really interesting stuff that he talks about that you wouldn't really consider to be connected to our genetics and how it makes up us. And it especially comes around the topic of cannibalism and also inbreeding. There is a medical reason why we do not actually eat our own kind, and it's due to the fact that if it doesn't matter if the body is healthy or the body is diseased, we can still get a genetic or diseases from a healthy or a diseased corpse that is human. And they literally did a study about this, and the study was happened in isolated tribes in Africa and Asia, where it is sort of like a custom to eat some of their own. And he does explain it. He also talks about inbreeding diseases that a lot of people don't associate or think about, that some of the reason why we might have these type of genetic traits or genetic defects or genetic issues that we have today might be due to prehistoric inbreeding that occurred in isolated tribes around the world and then passed down through generation. And so it's really, really interesting to like read this book and get knowledge and understanding about our human history in a sense, in a summarized version for the general public to read. The other reason why I wanted to read this book is because a lot of people don't think about it or have done enough research, and this mostly connects to my research that I did in my previous video, where a lot of people don't really think about that the hybrid program is actually a eugenics project or a genetic program. And a lot of people don't really understand a whole lot about eugenics. So he talks about a whole wide range of interesting thing about eugenics. And just to put a disclaimer in there, he does make up something in the book. I'm not going to tell people what it is until people actually like read the book. But he does tell people that he made something up in the book to order to like grab hold of his audience or make the book a little bit more interesting. But he does talk about it in the last chapter where he made it up, but he was trying to prove a point about it in his book. So he does have that disclaimer in the book just to let people know. But a lot of people don't really talk about eugenics or laws surrounding eugenics, and especially science, with scientists. So everything about science is like a gray area where there's not like, we don't really know if we can make a law around this type of stuff. So he does talk about that. He also does talk about that most of the research about genetics that happened in World War II cannot be actually be used in modern science, or cannot be used as a source due to the fact that they isn't really valuable, because they actually in future generations after World War II, they did confirm that most of the scientific projects that happened in World War II were actually not really good tests, because they actually disproved a lot of the tests in World War II that connected to genetics or eugenics in World War II. But the other thing that he talks about is eugenics is the moral code about eugenics. And one of the things that he talks about is IVF. IVF, for people who don't know, is a drug or a medical thing that women do to order to help them conceive a child. And it's also for people who have also for women who cannot conceive a child. And with IVF is that the couple or the woman can choose whether or not they want to have a male or a female child. And he also talks about it on a whole nother level or another spectrum, where in India, they were doing elective abortions. Most of the time in these elective abortions in India, the female fetus would be aborted and the male fetus would be liveable. And due to this day, because of that eugenics project or selective abortions in India, they are now having a huge giant population crisis. The reason being is because there's not enough women in their country to continue the next population. So I actually did look this up online. They're predicting in the next 25 years, or people my age or older cannot find wives. And they actually made a movie about this in India, where men that are becoming more towards the marrying age cannot find a wife due to the fact that there is no women in their village. The only women are their mothers or their aunts or other family members or relatives, and they're too old to conceive a child. And sometimes these villages can go weeks, months, and even years without seeing women in their village due to these selective abortions. And the same issue is going on with China. So it's kind of really interesting how eugenics can backfire and how eugenics can also be a good thing. But it's really, really interesting to like read this book and actually absorb this information. Don't be afraid to actually like reread the chapters, because he does jam pack each chapter with a lot of information. So don't be afraid if you have to like reread the chapter. But I really think this book is really interesting. I do think that it might answer a lot of questions about some stuff. And I think it's also a really good book to talk about, especially for people who are sort of getting into the science spectrum or starting to understand a little bit more about spirituality and a little bit more, or curious about it in a sense. I really do enjoy this book. I'm hoping to read more books from this author. He does have other books that he published, so I'm hoping to read those too. But if you have read this book, please let me know what your thoughts or opinions are. Please like or subscribe to my video. I really hope that you enjoy this video, and I really hope that you can like or subscribe to my video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Thank you so much for listening.